Chapter 1, Bread, Dust, and a Cry. The market at Dry Creek was a noisy sprawl of voices, horses, and dust. Wagons creaked under the weight of flour sacks. Women haggled over beans, and the air carried the mingled smells of leather, sweat, and baking bread. Colt Avery swung down from his sorrel mare, dust sliding from his trail-worn coat as he stepped onto the wooden planks outside the baker's stall. Spurs chimed against the boards, a sound that made heads turn, though no one lingered long on a drifter's shadow. He pushed through the crowd, voice low. "Loaf of bread," he muttered to the baker, laying down a silver coin. The baker, a heavy-set man with flour dusting his arms, nodded and wrapped the warm loaf in paper. Colt reached for it, ready to walk out town the same way he had ridden in. Unnoticed, unclaimed, untouched. That's when a small hand caught his sleeve. He looked down. A little girl, no more than 7, stared up at him with wide eyes the color of storm clouds. Her hair was tangled, cheeks smudged with dirt, and her voice trembled as she tugged again. "Mister," she whispered, almost swallowed by the noise of the market. "It's my mama. She ain't got much time. Today's her last day alive." Colt froze, bread forgotten in his hand. For a heartbeat, he said nothing, the words sinking deep into the silence that always followed him. He tried to shake her off, the way he would brush away dust from his coat. "Find your kin," he muttered, voice rough. "Ain't my place." But the girl's grip only tightened, tiny fingers clutching like she was holding on to the world itself. "We ain't got no one else," she said, her eyes wet now, glistening in the sun that beat down from a wide, merciless sky. Colt glanced around. Folks were staring, some with pity, most with indifference. Nobody stepped forward. The saloon piano carried a tinny tune down the street, laughter and shouts rising behind it. Life moving on as if the girl's world weren't shattering. He sighed, the sound heavy as desert wind. His hand hovered near hers, torn between breaking free and kneeling down to meet her gaze. He saw something in those eyes, a raw, desperate need that echoed a hollow place in himself. Finally, he crouched, lowering his voice. "Where's your mama, little one?" Her face lit with sudden hope. She pointed toward the far end of town, where the buildings thinned into lonely shacks clinging to the edge of the prairie. Colt straightened, bread under one arm, the girl's hand still locked in his. Dust swirled around their boots as he let her lead him away, the chatter of the market fading behind. He had come for bread, but the trail he was on now promised far more than hunger's end. It promised trouble, and maybe something he'd sworn he no longer believed in. Belonging. Chapter 2, The Dying Woman's Secret. The shack sat at the far edge of Dry Creek, leaning into the prairie wind, as though it fought too many storms and lost half the battles. Its roof sagged, boards weathered gray, and a lantern flickered weakly by the doorway. Colt Avery paused outside, the little girl tugging at his hand. For a long breath, he considered letting go, mounting his horse, and riding to the town was nothing but dust on the horizon. But the way her fingers clung told him she'd follow even if he tried. "Go on," Colt muttered, nodding to the door. She pushed it open, and the smell of sickness drifted out. Sour sweat, damp cloth, and the faint tang of blood. Colt stepped inside, spurs clinking against warped floorboards. The room was dim, lit by a single candle guttering on the table. In the bed lay a woman, thin and pale, her hair clinging damp to her forehead. Her breaths came shallow, like each one was wrestled from death's grip. The girl hurried to her side. "Mama, I found him. I found someone." The woman's eyes opened, dull but sharp enough to find Colt. She tried to sit, failed, and her lips twisted into a faint smile. "Not many men follow a child's cry anymore," she whispered. Her voice rasped like dry leaves. Colt shifted uncomfortably, tugging off his hat. Didn't figure to get dragged into a sick room. Just came for bread. "You came for more," she said and coughed. The sound raw. Her gaze softened toward the girl. Annie, she's all I got. If I don't see the morning, she won't have anyone. Not unless... She broke off, breath hitching. Not unless you help her. Colt looked at the child, Annie, who was staring at her with eyes far too old for her years. His jaw tightened. Lady, I'm no nursemaid. I ride alone. The woman's fingers gripped the blanket, veins standing out like cords. You don't understand. Her father, Mason Kane, he'll come. He'll take her, and she's better off dead than in his hands. The name hit Colt like a gunshot. Mason Kane, an outlaw with a reputation painted in blood. Colt had heard the name in saloons whispered over whiskey, the kind of man a bullet couldn't seem to stop. He stepped back, the shadows of the room pressing close. You're asking me to stand against Kane? That ain't my fight. The woman's eyes glistened with something more than fever. Pleading, desperate, a mother's last gamble. It'll be your fight soon enough. He won't leave you alone now. You looked Annie in the eyes, and a man who does that can't turn away. Colt's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to walk out into the night, but Annie's small hand found his again, warm against the calluses of his palm. He looked down at her, then at the dying woman whose hope flickered like the candle. Colt exhaled slow, heavy. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Outside, the prairie wind howled low, carried with it the promise of blood and reckonings yet to come. Chapter 3. Gunsmoke in Saloon. Dry Creek's only saloon blazed with lamplight as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and red. Laughter spilled out the swinging doors, mingling with piano keys hammered just slightly out of tune. The smell of whiskey, tobacco, and sweat hung heavy in the air. Colt Avery pushed through, boots thudding against the wooden floorboards, spurs clinking with each step. Conversations dimmed for a heartbeat as men turned their heads, weighing him with suspicious stares, then resumed. Cards slapped, coins clinked, and the scrape of chairs filled the silence left behind. Colt strode to the bar. Whiskey. The bartender slid him a glass, eyes narrowing. Don't recall see round here. I don't stick long enough to be remembered, Colt muttered, tossing the liquor back in one swallow. The burn steadied his nerves, though his mind still circled the name Clara Dawson had spoken, Mason Kane. It didn't take long to find talk of him. Men at the poker table in the corner spoke in low tones, heads bent close. Kane's riding back through. Reckons he's got something waiting for him in town. A laugh followed, sharp and mean. Widow Dawson, or what's left of her. Colt's jaw flexed. He turned his back to the bar and leaned against it, letting his shadow stretch across the floor. Funny thing, he said, voice carrying just enough to reach the card table. I heard Kane's nothing but a rabid dog in boots. A man like that don't deserve family. The poker game froze. 3 men looked up, their eyes hard and narrow, hands inching toward holsters. The air thickened, the piano stuttering to a halt as the saloon felt the storm gathering. One of them rose, tall and broad, a scar down his cheek. You got a death wish, stranger? Colt's hand hovered near his Colt revolver, but his eyes were steady, calm as desert stone. No, just telling the truth. The man lunged. Chairs scraped back. Women gasped, and then the saloon erupted. Colt pivoted, fist driving into the outlaw's gut before his gun cleared leather. Another swung a bottle, shattering glass against the wall as Colt ducked, drawing his revolver with a smooth, deadly motion. The hammer clicked back, the sound like thunder in the silence that followed. Don't. Colt said coldly, aiming steady. The 3 men froze, hate simmering in their eyes. One spat on the floor. Kane'll hear this. And when he comes, you'll be the first to bleed. Colt's gaze never wavered. He fired, not at them, but at the ceiling. The shot cracked through the room, splinters raining down. silencing the last murmur of protest. "Tell Mason I'll be waiting," Colt said, holstering his gun. The saloon held its breath as he strode out, night air rushing in behind him. Out on the street, the horizon still held the glow of sunset, but Colt knew darker days were riding fast. Chapter 4, Between Sunset and Shadows. The prairie sky bled red and gold as the sun sagged toward the horizon, painting Dry Creek in long, dusky shadows. Wind rattled through the sagebrush, carrying the faint, mournful cry of a coyote far out on the flats. Colt Avery walked up the narrow path to Clara Dawson's shack, boots stirring dust with each step. His shoulders ached from the fight at the saloon, his knuckles raw. But the sting wasn't what weighed him down. It was the name Mason Kane, and the promise of trouble riding closer by the hour. The door creaked as he stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of lavender soap, though sickness still clung to the air. Clara lay propped on thin pillows, candlelight soft against her hollowed cheeks. Annie sat on the floor beside the bed, tracing shapes in the dust with a finger. At the sound of Colt's boots, she looked up, her face brightening with a child's fragile hope. "You came back," Clara whispered, her voice low and tired, but carrying a warmth that pulled at him. Colt set his hat on the table, nodding once. "Wasn't sure I would, but I reckon leaving didn't sit right." Clara studied him, her eyes, pale, fevered, but still strong, searching his face. Most men don't trouble themselves with another woman's burden. "Why you?" Colt shifted, restless under her gaze. He reached for the bread he had carried earlier, setting it down with care. "Maybe 'cause I've carried my share of burdens. Maybe 'cause Annie looked at me like I was the last man standing between her and hell." Clara's lips curved faintly, though a cough stole the strength from her smile. When it passed, she reached for his hand, her fingers thin, cool against his rough skin. She needs someone steady, someone who won't run when shadows get long. Mason won't stop. He'll come for her. And I. Her voice faltered, but her eyes shone with fierce, quiet love. "I won't let him take her, not while there's breath in me." Colt swallowed hard, something tightening in his chest. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a dying woman, but a mother fighting with the last of her fire. And behind that fire, something softer flickered, something meant for him. "I ain't no savior," Colt said quietly, "but I'll stand between him and Annie, between him and you if I must." Her hand trembled in his, but she squeezed, gratitude glimmering through her exhaustion. "That's more than I ever hoped for." Outside, the last sliver of sun dipped behind the hills, casting the room in shadow. Annie curled up at her mother's side, already drifting toward sleep. Colt sat there, silent, the weight of Clara's hand in his, the scent of sagebrush drifting through the open window. For the first time in years, the drifter felt tethered, not by chains, but by choice, by hearts that had chosen him. Chapter 5, The Last Stand. Dawn cracked over Dry Creek like a rifle shot. The sky streaked in burning orange. The air was tense, the kind of quiet that pressed down heavy before a storm. Colt Avery stood in the middle of Main Street, boots planted in the dust, his revolver strapped low on his hip. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. Doors were shut, curtains drawn, though faces peeked through slits, praying they wouldn't see blood spill, but knowing they would. Hooves thundered in the distance. Mason Kane was coming. Colt's jaw tightened as the outlaw and his gang rode in, a dozen hard-eyed men trailing dust behind them. Mason, broad-shouldered and dark-eyed, sat tall in the saddle, the kind of man who wore cruelty like a crown. He reined up at the edge of town, sneer curling his lips. "Well, now," Mason drawled, voice carrying over the empty street, "who the hell are you to stand where I ride?" Colt didn't flinch. "Name's Avery. Don't matter none, though. What matters is you won't lay a hand on that little girl." Mason laughed, the sound sharp, echoing against storefronts. His men joined in, the jeer of hyenas circling prey. You think one drifter's enough to stop me? Clara's mine. Annie's mine. Always was. Colt's hand drifted near his revolver, but his eyes never left Mason's. Not anymore. Silence dropped heavy, broken only by the creak of saddles and the distant cry of a hawk. Then Mason's hand twitched. The street erupted. Gunfire cracked like thunder, smoke billowing through the morning light. Colt dove, rolling behind a water trough, bullets sparking off the iron rim. He came up firing, 2 shots dropping men from their saddles. Horses screamed, hoofs tearing at the ground. Mason's men scattered, some diving for cover, others pressing the attack. Colt moved with a calm that came from years on the trail. Every pull of the trigger measured, every shot echoing like fate. Dust churned. Glass shattered as windows exploded from stray fire. The whole town was shaking under the weight of violence. Then it was just Colt and Mason, face to face in the center of the street, smoke swirling between them. Colt's chest heaved, blood trickling from a graze on his arm. Mason grinned, lips curled around hate. You ain't taking what's mine, Mason spat, raising his gun. Colt fired first. The report rang out, echoing across Dry Creek. Mason staggered, eyes wide, clutching his chest before collapsing into the dust, the power and poison of his reign bleeding out into the earth. Silence followed, broken only by the wind rustling through the empty street. Colt stood over the body, shoulders heavy, revolver still warm in his hand. Around him, the townsfolk began to emerge, timid at first, then with relief flooding their faces. The outlaw was dead. Dry Creek was free. But Colt knew freedom had cost him more than blood. It had bound him heart and soul to Clara and Annie. Chapter 6, A New Dawn Over Sagebrush. The town of Dry Creek woke slow the next morning, as though it, too, was sore from the gunfight. The streets still bore scars, splintered boards, shattered glass glinting in the dirt. But the air felt lighter. The weight of Mason Kane's shadow lifted at last. Smoke curled from chimneys, roosters crowed, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang steady, like life itself was reclaiming what fear had stolen. Colt Avery walked the road with a heaviness in his limbs, blood dried stiff against his sleeve. He had slept none, keeping watch through the long night. The dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and gold, a far gentler color than the red dust that had choked yesterday. At the edge of town, he pushed open the door to Clara Dawson's shack. The hinges groaned, but inside the air was calmer, touched by the faint scent of sagebrush drifting through the open window. Annie stirred from where she lay curled in a chair, eyes blinking wide. "Mr. Colt?" she whispered, hope blooming in her voice. He tipped his hat, forcing a faint smile. "Still standing, little one." Her face broke into a grin, and she darted past him into the morning light, chasing after the safety she felt at last. Colt's eyes lifted to bed. Clara lay propped on pillows, her skin still pale, but there was color in her cheeks now, the fever broken. She met his gaze, tired but alive. "You came back," she murmured, voice soft as the wind. Colt stepped closer, removing his hat, setting on the table like a man laying down more than just dust and leather. He sat by her side, his rough hand brushing hers. For once, she wasn't cold. "I told you I'd stand between him and you," he said, his voice gravel but steady. "Looks like I did." Her eyes glistened, tears shimmering in the golden light, spilling across the floorboards. "You risked your life, for Annie, for me. I don't know how to thank you. You don't owe me thanks." He hesitated, his thumb grazed in her knuckles. "Truth is, I reckon I needed something to fight for again." Silence stretched, not heavy but gentle, filled by the sound of wind through sage and Annie's laughter outside. Clara's lips curved into a trembling smile. Then maybe you found it. Colt looked at her, at the fragile strength burning through her sickness, and for the first time in years he felt tethered. Not to the trail, not to the past, but to the future. He rose, helped to the doorway. Together they stepped into morning sun, watching Annie chase a butterfly through the grass, her laughter ringing like bells. Horses grazed nearby, their silhouettes dark against the rising light. Colt slipped his arm around Clara, steadying her. The dawn spread wide over sagebrush and red earth, and for a drifter who had once believed himself bound in nothing, it felt like the beginning of home. The sun dipped low over the prairie, spilling fire across the horizon. Dry Creek's dust still carried the echo of gunfire, but now only the steady clop of horses and the faint hum of saloon music drifted on the evening air. The wind stirred sagebrush along the edge of town, carrying with it a sweetness that promised change. Colt Avery stood on the boardwalk outside Claire Dawson's shack, his silhouette cut sharp against the setting sun. His revolver hung heavy at his side, but for the first time it felt like a burden he could finally lay down. Behind him, the door creaked and Clara stepped into the fading light, pale but alive, leaning lightly on the frame. Annie skipped at her side, her laughter ringing like silver bells, chasing away the last ghosts of fear. Colt turned, hat in hand. Their eyes met, hers filled with gratitude too deep for words. His was quiet, awe he could no longer hide. "You came for bread," Clara said softly, voice trembling with a smile, "but you gave us a future." Colt stepped closer, his hand finding hers. The world around them seemed to still, the sunset burning gold in her eyes. "I thought I'd ride on forever," he murmured, "but I reckon I found the place worth stopping for." Clara leaned into him, her hand warm against his chest. Annie twirled in the dust, their laughter and silence weaving together like a hymn. The last light of day bathed them in fire and gold. A drifter, a mother, and a child, no longer broken pieces, but a family at last.